I will take the name my enemies have given me. The whites will learn it, and you will earn it." Those were the words that defined Jay Silverheels, the first Native American actor ever to play a Native character on television. To the world, he was Tonto, the loyal companion of the Lone Ranger. But behind that brave face, behind that quiet dignity, was a man who lived with pain, injustice, and a truth that Hollywood didn't want to see. In 1957, when someone asked Jay about his most famous role, he didn't hesitate. He said 3 words: calm, cold, and unforgettable. "Tonto is stupid." That was the truth he could no longer hide. What the world didn't see was that he was paid only half of what his white co-star earned. What they didn't hear were the cruel remarks whispered behind the cameras. What they didn't know was that one director once got so angry with him, he tried to physically attack him on set. Even the name Tonto itself carried a burden in Spanish. It meant fool. And that word haunted Jay Silverheels for the rest of his life. But before Hollywood, before the bright lights and fame, there was Harold J. Smith, born on May 26, 1912, on the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve in Ontario, Canada. A small boy in a large Mohawk family, one of at least 10 children squeezed into a tiny home. His father, Alexander George Edwin Smith, was a hero, a decorated veteran who earned the Military Cross in World War I for bravery at the Battle of St. Eloi. But the war had taken more from him than it ever gave. He returned home deafened by the roar of artillery, scarred inside and out, surviving on just $49 a month from the government. His medals shone, but they couldn't feed his family. Harold watched his father struggle through the pain, headaches that never stopped, a silence that grew heavier each day. His mother, Mabel, part Mohawk and part Seneca, did everything she could to keep the family alive. She treated illnesses with traditional medicine because doctors wouldn't see them. The family was poor. Their meals came from the land, their strength from the will to survive. From the very start, life was hard. But Harold had something rare, a spark. By 5 years old, he was already racing through fields, fast as the wind, playing lacrosse with the older kids. By 19, he was a professional athlete, one of the fastest players in the league. He joined the Toronto Tecumsehs and traveled across North America, Buffalo, Rochester, Atlantic City, bringing with him his cousins and brothers, men with names like Porky, Beef, and Chubby. Together, they escaped poverty one game at a time. It was during one of those games that Harold earned a name that would follow him forever. He ran so fast that his shoes seemed to flash in the light. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Look at those silver heels!" And just like that, a legend was born. From then on, he was Jay Silverheels. The newspapers loved him. Fans lined up to see him play. He scored 4 goals a game, sometimes more, and his speed made him a target. Coaches would assign to men just to stop him, but most couldn't. Still, fame didn't mean freedom. The world outside the field was cruel. Canada's government was running its network of residential schools, brutal places that tried to erase Indigenous identity. Children were punished for speaking their language, for practicing their traditions. Some were beaten, others forced to eat soap. Jay saw the pain up close. His own sister was taken away to one of those schools. When she came back, she could barely speak her own language. She wasn't the same person anymore. It was a generation scarred in silence. During the Great Depression, things only got worse. The family moved to Buffalo, chasing work that didn't exist. Jay labored on farms, took odd jobs, anything to keep food on the table. His father could barely move from his war injuries, and his mother bartered family heirlooms for food. The government rations were spoiled, but they had no choice. For years, they lived like ghosts, unseen, unheard, forgotten. But Jay refused to give up. His speed, his talent, his fire, they became his way out. In 1932, he went fully professional, $75 a game, a fortune during those dark years. Crowds loved him, even when fights broke out. In one match in Montreal, a rough foul turned into a full-blown brawl. Jay threw a few punches, got suspended, and when he returned, the crowds tripled. They wanted more of the man with silver heels, but the world had other plans. After lacrosse came boxing. Jay entered the Golden Gloves tournament at Madison Square Garden, the big stage. He fought hard, reaching the semifinals, but one brutal hit shattered his jaw in 2 places. The pain was unimaginable. The injury ended his boxing dream, but not his spirit. He lived on a liquid diet for weeks, lost 25 pounds, and when the swelling went down, he was still standing, still smiling. That fight taught him something. Pain passes. Strength stays. In 1937, Jay's lacrosse team toured Los Angeles. It was supposed to be just another stop, but fate stepped in. While he was sprinting across the field at Gilmore Stadium, a Hollywood comedian named Joe E. Brown spotted him. Something about the way Jay moved, the power, the grace, caught his eye. Brown offered him a tiny movie role. A stunt, a diving catch that took 11 takes to get right. Jay earned $150 for it, more than double what lacrosse paid. That moment changed everything. Soon, he got a Screen Actors Guild card and started using the name Jay Silverheels full-time. By the end of the year, he had appeared in 5 films. None of them were big, but he was officially, a part of Hollywood. But Hollywood didn't welcome him with open arms. He worked as a stuntman by day, earning less than $20 and washed dishes at night to survive. Casting directors treated native actors like props, not people. They made him strip to the waist, measuring muscles instead of talent. Still, Jay endured. In 1939, he landed a real acting job, drums along the Mohawk. $350 a week. It was more than he had ever made in his life. The studio loved his name, said it sounded exotic. They wanted him to play nameless Indian warriors, background figures, never leads. He took the work anyway. He needed it. By 1941, he had over 15 film appearances, though most went uncredited. He didn't complain. He studied Shakespeare in his spare time because a friend told him, "If you can read this, you can read anything." He didn't understand it at first. But he learned word by word. Then came World War II. Jay served his country again. When the war ended, he returned to Hollywood under a new name, Jay Silvers. But nothing had changed. Native roles were still given to white men in brown paint. He auditioned for Captain from Castile in 1946, starving himself so his suit would fit. The director made him take off his shirt, like always. Humiliating. But he got the part, small, uncredited, and forgettable. Still, it paid as he traveled with his lacrosse team through the American South. He faced racism head-on. Hotels turned him away. Restaurants refused to serve him. Once in Louisville, the police threatened him for using a restroom marked whites only. That was his reality. Every single day. Years passed before anyone in Hollywood truly noticed him. Then came 1948 Key Largo, directed by John Huston, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall. Jay played Tom Osceola, his first credited role in a major film. It was the breakthrough he'd been waiting for. 2 years later, he played Geronimo in Broken Arrow, a film that claimed to portray Native Americans with dignity. But even then, the lead Native character was played by a white man in dark makeup. Jay brought honor and depth to the screen, but Hollywood still refused to give him the spotlight. Then, in 1949, his life changed forever. The producers of The Lone Ranger were looking for someone to play Tonto. 35 actors auditioned. Jay Silverheels won. on September 15, 1949. The first episode aired, and for the first time in television history, a Native American played a Native American character. It should have been a moment of triumph. And it was. At first, but behind that proud image was a man trapped in contradiction. Because Tonto, the name known by millions, meant stupid. Jay knew it. He hated it. But he couldn't escape it. He smiled on camera. He played the loyal companion. But deep down, the insult burned. When he returned to his home reserve in 1957, someone asked what he thought about his role. His answer was simple. Tonto is stupid. 3 words, filled with everything he'd never been allowed to say. Jay often refused to read the broken English lines they gave him. Instead, he ad-libbed short, clipped sentences that sounded more real. Me? Wait here. You go into town. The directors hated it. One even tried to attack him on set. But his co-star, Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger himself, defended him. Let it play, he said. It sounds more natural. Jay wasn't just an actor. He was quietly rewriting how Native people were heard on television. The show's budget was tight, just $12,000 per episode. There were no dressing rooms. Jay and Clayton had to change in a gas station restroom. The heat was unbearable. One day, Jay refused to dress until the producers fixed it. The next day, they had private dressing rooms. It was a small victory. But it mattered, because for Jay, every act of defiance, every demand for dignity, was part of a much bigger fight, not just for himself. But for every Native actor who would come after him, he could have accepted the fame, ignored the injustice, and stayed silent. But he didn't. He stood his ground, and that's why, even decades later, the name Jay Silverheels means something deeper than the character he played. It means resilience. It means pride. It means a man who, even in silence, never stopped fighting to be seen as equal. The Lone Ranger became a cultural phenomenon. Kids across America wore cowboy hats, plastic badges, and shouted the famous catchphrase, "Hi-yo, Silver." Away. Every week, millions tuned in to watch justice ride across the desert. To them, the Lone Ranger was a hero. And beside him, always faithful, always loyal, rode Tonto Jay Silverheels. He was the first Native American television star. His face appeared on cereal boxes, lunch pails, comic books. He was famous, respected, and admired, at least. That's what people saw on the surface. But fame didn't change the truth. Jay was still paid less, still typecast, still fighting a system built to keep him in the shadows. Clayton Moore, the Lone Ranger himself, earned a small fortune, thousands per week. Product endorsements, publicity tours. Jay earned half of that, sometimes less. His contract even restricted him from taking other roles while the show was filming. He was famous, but trapped. When fans lined up for autographs, they shouted, "Hey, Tonto." Never Jay. Some even handed him feathers or tomahawks to sign. They didn't see him as a man. They saw a caricature. Still, Jay smiled. He stayed polite, because he knew that one wrong word, one sign of anger, could destroy everything he had. Built behind that calm smile was a deep storm. He'd grown up watching his people pushed to the margins, their language beaten out of them, their history erased from textbooks, their faces replaced in films by white actors in red makeup. Now he was on screen, representing all of them, but in a role that made him feel small. It was a cruel paradox. The more famous he became, the more invisible he felt. On set, he endured long hours under the scorching California sun, wrapped in suede and wool that turned the heat into a furnace. Some days he fainted. Others, he simply stood silent, waiting. And yet he kept showing up because he knew what his presence meant. Millions of native children saw someone like them on television for the very first time. Even if the lines were written in broken English, even if the story wasn't fair, they could still point to the screen and say, "That's one of us." That mattered. But Jay wanted more. He started speaking out in interviews quietly, carefully about the need for native stories told by native people. He knew the cost. Hollywood didn't like actors who spoke about equality. But he spoke anyway. After The Lone Ranger ended in 1957, Jay was ready to move beyond Tonto. He hoped to find roles that showed native people as strong, intelligent, and human. But the scripts that came his way were the same chiefs. Warriors, sidekicks, stereotypes. Hollywood didn't want Jay Silverheels the man. It only wanted Tonto, so he began creating something new. He founded a group called the Indian Actors Workshop in Los Angeles, the first organization dedicated to helping native performers find real training and better opportunities in film and television. Jay taught acting there himself, encouraging young indigenous actors to hold their heads high and never settle for less. He told them, "If you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they'll tell it wrong." That became his mission. The transition wasn't easy. Work was scarce, and the fame that had once surrounded him began to fade. His former co-star, Clayton Moore, continued appearing in public as the Lone Ranger, mask, costume, and all. Fans loved it. But Jay couldn't do the same. He didn't own his character. And he didn't want to live inside Tonto's shadow forever. He wanted respect, not nostalgia. When reporters asked about the show in later years, his tone changed. He said he was grateful for what the Lone Ranger gave him, but he also called out its limitations. He described how native actors were treated as background props, decorations in someone else's story. His honesty wasn't always welcome. Studios stopped calling, but Jay didn't care anymore. He had already made history, and now he wanted to change it in the 1960s. He made occasional film appearances, often as native leaders or warriors. But this time, he demanded dignity in every role. He refused to play buffoonish or broken characters. He turned down work that felt insulting, even if it meant losing money. By now, his body was slowing down. Years of stunts, injuries, and grueling schedules had taken their toll. But his spirit remained unshaken. In 1966, he appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, not as an actor promoting a new movie, but as a comedian. He told stories, laughed about Hollywood, and even poked fun at Tonto's broken English. The audience roared with laughter. But beneath the humor was a man taking back his power. He was rewriting his own legacy, one joke at a time. Jay Silverheels was more than the sidekick they made him play. He was an athlete, a soldier, a father, a pioneer. And though Hollywood never fully gave him the respect he earned, his people did, back home on the Six Nations Reserve. He was celebrated as a hero, a symbol of resilience and pride. The same boy who once played lacrosse barefoot in the fields had become the face of a generation. But time caught up with him. In the late 1970s, Jay began to struggle with health problems. Diabetes and stroke complications made it hard for him to move or speak. The man who had once raced across screens and stadiums could now barely walk. Yet even then, his spirit didn't fade. He continued mentoring young native actors, writing and speaking whenever he could. He told them not to let the world define them, to keep telling stories that mattered. On March 5, 1980, Jay Silverheels passed away in Calabasas, California. At the age of 6'7", the world barely noticed. There were no parades, no front-page headlines. Hollywood, the same industry that once depended on his image, moved on in silence. But among his people, and among those who knew what he'd endured, his name lived on. A few years later, the Screen Actors Guild honored him with a posthumous award for his contributions to the industry. And in 1993, Canada inducted him into its Indian Hall of Fame. It was late, far too late, but it was something. Decades later, when Disney released The Lone Ranger in 2013, the role of Tonto returned. This time played by Johnny Depp. The controversy erupted immediately. Native communities criticized Hollywood for repeating the same mistakes, casting another non-native actor. Wearing paint and feathers, speaking in fragments, and suddenly, Jay Silverheels' words came echoing back across time. Tonto is stupid. It wasn't anger. It was truth. A truth that still stings today because Jay had always known that representation was more than just a face on a screen. It was about respect, dignity, and truth. When he first took that role, he said quietly, "I will take the name my enemies have given me. The whites will learn it, and you will earn it." And he did. He turned a word meant to demean into a platform that opened doors. Jay Silverheels gave a generation something to hold on to, proof that Native people belonged not behind the camera, not in the shadows, but at the very heart of the story. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't always happy. But he stood tall in a world that tried to make him small. He smiled when it hurt. He fought when it mattered, and he kept moving forward, just like the athlete he once was. Running so fast that his heels flashed silver in the sun. That flash, that moment, is what remains. Jay Silverheels, the man who broke Hollywood's silence, the man who turned pain into progress, and the man who proved that no stereotype can last forever. Because heroes don't always wear masks, sometimes. They ride quietly beside them, waiting for the world to finally see who they really are.